studied warriors from 93 different species across the known galaxy. He had watched the blade dancers of Prime move like water through their enemies. He had observed the stone-skinned crush battle tanks with their bare hands. He had documented the silent killers of the Void clans and the berserker rage of the Crimson Horde. In his 200 years of life as a warrior scholar, he believed he had seen every form of combat excellence the universe had to offer. They were proud of their reputation. They were tall, strong, covered in natural armor plates that could stop most projectile weapons. Their eyes could see in complete darkness. Their reflexes were faster than any known species. For 10,000 years, they had been considered the finest warriors in the galaxy. No species had ever made a feel fear in battle. Fear was something they trained out of their young before they reached adulthood. A who felt fear was considered defective, broken, unworthy of their heritage. Stood on the observation deck of the Allied cruiser Oath and watched the human soldiers training in the cargo bay below. There were perhaps 40 of them, running through combat drills under the watchful eye of their commander. They were small creatures, barely reaching his chest in height. They had no natural armor, no claws, no fangs. Their eyes were weak, their hearing limited, their physical strength unremarkable. By every measure used to evaluate warriors, they should have been classified as prey animals rather than predators. Yet here they were, serving alongside thee and in the Allied fleet. The humans had only been part of the galactic community for 60 years. They had no ancient military traditions, no legendary victories, nothing that should have earned them a place at this table. Found their inclusion puzzling and slightly insulting. The human commander was a woman named Captain Laura Cole. She was perhaps 40 years old by their species counting, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. Had spoken with her several times since the humans had come aboard 3 weeks ago. She was polite, professional, and completely unremarkable. She asked intelligent questions about tactics and listened carefully to the answers. She never boasted about human capabilities or tried to impress him with stories of their battles. In fact, she seemed almost humble about her species, which found strange. Most species spent considerable effort convincing others of their worth. He turned away from the observation window and walked to the tactical center. The Allied fleet had been stationed near the Hollow Reach for 2 months now, guarding the border against potential threats. It was considered a quiet posting, far from any active conflict zones. The 27 ships under their command spent most of their time running training exercises and maintaining patrol routes. That changed the moment stepped into the tactical center. Admiral, the commander of the fleet, stood before a massive holographic display showing a portion of space that was rapidly filling with red markers. His expression was grim, his armored plates pulled tight against his skull in the display of extreme concern. "How many?" asked as he approached. "The scouts counted over 4,000 bioships before they were destroyed," said. "A full hive swarm. They will reach our position in approximately 6 hours." Felt his blood turn cold, though he showed no external reaction. They were nightmares given flesh. They were a species that existed only to consume, to spread, to destroy everything in their path. Their bioships were living creatures that bred warriors in their bellies, hundreds of them per vessel. A full hive swarm meant millions of soldiers, each one a killing machine designed by evolution for nothing but slaughter. No fleet had ever held ground against a full swarm assault. The standard protocol was simple: retreat, evacuate civilians, and hope the swarm chose a different direction. "We should begin withdrawal procedures immediately," said Commander, the representative. "They were a cautious species, excellent diplomats and engineers but not natural fighters. We cannot hope to defeat such a force." Nodded slowly. "I agree. We will begin evacuation of all non-essential personnel within the hour." It was at that moment that Captain Cole entered the tactical center. She had apparently been summoned along with the other Allied commanders, though noticed she arrived last. Her uniform was slightly disheveled from the interrupted training session. She studied the holographic display in silence for a long moment while the other commanders discussed withdrawal logistics. "What assets are behind us?" she asked quietly. The room fell silent, turned to look at her with something like surprise on his face. "I do not understand the question, Captain." "Behind our current position," Cole said. "What cannot evacuate in time if we retreat?" Pulled up the relevant data on his personal display. He had not considered this question because it was irrelevant. The fleet would retreat, and whatever was behind them would have to fend for itself. That was simply how things worked when facing an overwhelming force. "There is a medical station approximately 4 hours behind our current position," he said. It houses specialized equipment that cannot be moved quickly. Current population is approximately 12,000, including patients and medical staff. Cole nodded once, her expression unchanged. Then we hold. The words hung in the air like something physical, stared at the human woman, trying to determine if she was joking or simply insane. Commander made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been choking. Even Admiral seemed momentarily speechless. Captain Cole said finally, "I respect your courage, but what you suggest is impossible. We have 27 ships against thousands. We would be slaughtered." "Maybe," Cole said, "but those 12,000 people will definitely be slaughtered if we leave. So we hold. We buy them time. We do whatever we have to do." She said it simply, without drama or emphasis. She said it like she was discussing the weather or the schedule for tomorrow's training exercises. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Felt something stir in his chest. It was not respect, exactly. It was something older and stranger, something he could not identify. He looked at this small, fragile human woman who was calmly proposing to die for people she had never met, and he realized that perhaps he had not seen everything the universe had to offer after all. Perhaps he had not even come close. They arrived ahead of schedule. They always did. Their bioships moved through space like a plague of locusts, blocking out the stars themselves with their numbers. Stood at his battle station on the Oath and watched the scanner displays fill with so many contacts that the system began to lag. He had fought the twice before in smaller engagements. He knew what was coming. Admiral had ultimately agreed to hold position, though suspected it was shame rather than strategy that motivated him. A commander could not be seen retreating while a human stood firm. It would be a stain on their species' honor that would last for generations. So the Allied fleet formed a defensive line and prepared to die. The battle began with fire and silence. In space, there was no sound. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, and warriors died by the thousands without making a noise that could travel through the void. The Allied fleet fought hard, their weapons cutting through wave after wave of bioships, but for every enemy they destroyed, 10 more took its place. Then the boarding parties came. Heard the impact through the hull of the Oath. They did not use docking tubes or airlocks. They simply crashed their smaller craft into enemy ships and chewed through the metal with acid and claws. Within minutes, the corridors were filled with the sound of gunfire and screaming. He gathered his squad of warriors and moved to intercept the closest breach point. They found a group of already inside, perhaps 20 of the creatures. They were horrible to look upon. They stood on 4 legs with 2 additional limbs ending in blades of bone. Their bodies were covered in chitin armor the color of dried blood. They had no eyes, navigating instead through some form of sensing that no scientist had ever fully understood. Their mouths were circular pits, filled with rotating teeth that could bite through steel. They engaged them with practiced efficiency. Plasma rifles fired in controlled bursts. Blades flashed in the corridor lights. Himself killed 3 of the creatures, his training taking over as he moved through the combat like water through stones. Within minutes, the breach point was secure. "The humans are under heavy assault in the lower sections," came a voice over his communication device. "Reinforcements requested." Looked at his squad. They had taken no casualties, only minor wounds that their armor had absorbed. The logical choice was to continue securing their own section. The humans were not his responsibility. They had chosen to stay and fight. Whatever happened to them was their own concern. But something made him change direction. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was that strange feeling he had experienced in the tactical center when Captain Cole had spoken. He did not fully understand his own motivations as he led his squad toward the human positions. He expected to find corpses. The humans had been assigned to defend Cargo Bay 7 and the surrounding corridors, a large area with many entry points. It was a difficult position to hold even for experienced warriors. For the fragile humans, it should have been impossible. Instead, he found Sergeant Danny Price and his Marines still fighting. The corridor was filled with bodies, dozens of them piled on top of each other in some places. The walls were scorched with plasma burns and splattered with the dark fluid that passed for blood. The floor was slick with it, and in the middle of this carnage, the humans were still standing. Saw a young soldier, barely more than a boy, crouched behind an overturned cargo container. His left arm was missing below the elbow, the wound roughly sealed with some kind of medical foam. Blood soaked his uniform from shoulder to waist. He should have been unconscious or dead. Instead, he was firing his weapon with his remaining hand, each shot precise and controlled. "Private," someone shouted, "fall back to the medical station." Cannot shouted back, "Still got hostiles on my 12. He kept firing. His face was pale from blood loss, his body shaking with shock and pain, but he kept firing. Turned and saw a woman, Corporal Shaw, throw herself at a warrior that had broken through the defensive line. The creature was 3 times her size. Its bone blades could cut her in half with a single stroke. She did not seem to care. She drove a combat knife into the cluster of sensory organs on its head while its claws tore into her shoulder. She was screaming, but not in terror. It was a sound of pure rage, of absolute refusal to accept defeat. They hesitated. Had never seen that before. They did not hesitate. They did not feel fear or doubt. They were biological machines programmed for one purpose only. Yet this one pulled back from Shaw, its body language displaying something that looked almost like confusion. His squad joined the battle, their plasma rifles cutting down the remaining in the corridor. Within minutes, the immediate threat was eliminated. Stood in the aftermath, surrounded by human and dead, and tried to understand what he had just witnessed. Sergeant Price approached him. The man was wounded in at least 4 places that could see. His face was covered in blood, some of it his own and some of it belonging to creatures he had killed. He was smiling. "Thanks for the backup," Price said. "Thought we were done for a minute there." "You should have been," said. "Your position was indefensible. You were outnumbered and outmatched. How are you still alive?" Price shrugged, then winced at the pain the movement caused. Stubbornness mostly, plus they have never fought humans before. They did not know what to expect. What should they have expected? The sergeant looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death and had not yet finished seeing more. "That we do not know when to quit. That is basically our whole thing as a species." Behind him, Private finally collapsed. Medical personnel rushed to his side. Corporal Shaw was being treated for her shoulder wound, which was deep enough that could see bone. She was arguing with the medic, insisting she could still fight. Realized that the strange feeling in his chest had a name after all. It was not respect. It was not admiration. It was the beginning of fear. Not fear of the humans themselves, but fear of what they represented. Fear of a species that did not know its own limits. Fear of creatures who fought hardest when they were closest to death. They were monsters. Everyone knew that. They were the terror of the galaxy, the nightmare that other species whispered about in the dark. But they had hesitated. They had shown something like fear. And they had shown it to humans. The battle continued for 7 hours without pause. Lost count of how many he killed. He lost count of how many times the enemy breached the hull and how many times they were pushed back. The Oath was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds, its corridors filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. Half the crew was dead or wounded. The other Allied ships reported similar conditions. They were losing slowly but certainly, and everyone knew it. During a brief lull in the fighting, found himself in the makeshift medical bay that had been established in Cargo Bay 7. The human wounded filled every available surface. Some of them were dying. Others were already dead and had not yet been moved. The medical staff worked with desperate efficiency, saving those who could be saved and making comfortable those who could not. Captain Cole was there, sitting on a cargo container while a medic wrapped bandages around her ribs. She had been wounded during a boarding action 2 hours earlier. A blade had caught her across the torso, cutting through her armor and into the flesh beneath. The wound was serious but not fatal. She had refused evacuation to the medical station behind them, insisting that she would stay with her people. Approached her, he was not sure why. Perhaps he wanted answers. Perhaps he simply wanted to understand. "May I speak with you, Captain?" he asked. Cole looked up at him with tired gray eyes. "Of course, what is on your mind?" "I have been observing your soldiers throughout this battle," said. "I have seen things I do not understand." Private continued fighting after losing his arm. Corporal Shaw attacked an enemy 3 times her size with nothing but a knife. Your people fight as if they do not know they are supposed to die. "They know," Cole said quietly. "Believe me, they know." "Then why do they continue?" "Warriors suppress fear through mental discipline. We train ourselves not to feel it, but your people clearly feel fear. I can see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices. They are terrified, yet they fight anyway. How is this possible?" Cole was silent for a moment. The medic finished with her bandages and moved on to another patient. Around them, the sounds of the ship groaning under stress mixed with the distant thunder of weapons fire. "Fear is not the enemy," she said finally. "Fear is information. It tells you that something matters, that something is at stake. My people are afraid because they understand what will happen if we fail. Those 12,000 civilians will die. Our friends will die. Everything we care about will be consumed by monsters. That fear is not weakness. It is clarity." "But how do you function with such feelings?" asked. "Fear clouds judgment. It causes hesitation. It leads to mistakes." "Sometimes," Cole admitted. "But it also motivates, it focuses. When you are truly afraid of losing something, you will do anything to protect it. You will push past limits you did not know you had. You will find strength you never believed existed." She paused and looked at him directly. "Your people suppress fear because you think it makes you weaker. My people use fear because we know it makes us stronger." Considered this. It went against everything he had been taught since childhood. Philosophy held that emotion was the enemy of the warrior. Fear, anger, love, grief, all of it had to be controlled and contained. A warrior who felt too deeply was a warrior who would make mistakes. But he had seen Private continue fighting with one arm missing. He had seen Corporal Shaw attack an impossible enemy and survive through sheer fury. He had seen humans accomplish things that should not have been possible by any rational measure. Perhaps they had been wrong. Perhaps suppressing emotion was not the path to strength. Perhaps the humans had discovered something that his people had never understood. "Your philosophy is strange to me," said, "but I cannot argue with the results. Your soldiers have earned my respect today." Cole smiled slightly. It was a tired smile, the smile of someone who had seen too much death and expected to see more. "They are good people, scared people, but good ones. That is usually enough." A communication came through before could respond. More were breaching the ship in Section 12. He gathered his weapons and prepared to move out, but he paused at the entrance to the cargo bay. "Captain Cole," he said, "among my people, there is a phrase we use for warriors who have proven themselves beyond doubt. We call them Val, which means those who walk with death as a companion. I have never used this phrase for anyone outside my own species, but I use it now for you and your people." Cole nodded, accepting the honor with simple grace. "Thank you, now go kill some monsters. We will hold here." He went, the battle continued. But something had changed in. He had come to the ship believing that humans were weak and unremarkable. He had thought them prey animals playing at being warriors. He had been wrong. So completely and totally wrong that he felt ashamed of his earlier judgments. The humans were not weak. They were simply a different kind of strong. A kind that felt fear fully and completely and used that fear as fuel for impossible courage. A kind that knew they were going to die and fought anyway, not despite their terror but because of it. As he moved through the burning corridors of the Oath, cutting down with blade and rifle, began to understand something new about the nature of bravery. For 200 years, he had believed that courage meant not feeling fear. Now he knew the truth. Courage meant feeling fear and standing firm regardless. The humans had taught him that, and he would never forget it. The Queen ship arrived at the 9th hour of the battle. It emerged from the swarm like a mountain rising from the sea, so massive that it blocked out entire sections of starlight. Watched it on the tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in over a century. His hands trembled. His heart beat faster. His mind screamed at him to run. The Queen ship was ancient beyond measure. It had consumed entire civilizations. It had survived weapons that could crack planets. At its heart lived the Hive Queen herself, the central intelligence that controlled every warrior in the swarm. As long as she lived, the swarm would continue fighting. As long as she lived, there was no hope of victory. Admiral called an emergency meeting of all surviving commanders. The tactical center was crowded with holographic projections. The physical commanders, too, scattered across the damaged fleet to gather in person. Stood beside Captain Cole, who had refused to remain in the medical bay despite her wounds. "We cannot win," said flatly. "The Queen ship is too heavily defended. We have lost 11 ships already and our remaining vessels are badly damaged. If we continue fighting, we will be destroyed within hours." "Then we retreat," said Commander. The diplomat looked exhausted, his normally smooth skin marked with stress patterns. "We have bought time. The medical station should be completing evacuation now. We have done what we could." "The evacuation is only 60% complete," one of the communications officers reported. "They need at least 4 more hours." Silence fell over the tactical center. 4 more hours. They would be dead in 2 at the current rate of attrition. The math was simple and brutal. There is one option, Captain Cole said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. The expression was unreadable. Go on, Captain. The queenship is the key. If it is destroyed, the swarm will fragment and scatter. The remaining will become disorganized, operating on instinct rather than strategy. They will still be dangerous, but they will no longer be coordinated. Your fleet could survive. We have already discussed this, said. The queenship cannot be destroyed. Its defenses are too strong. From the outside, yes, Cole said. But a small ship could potentially slip through the defensive perimeter during one of our fleet's attack runs. It could dock with the queenship directly and deliver a strike team to the interior. If that team could reach the queen herself and eliminate her, the ship would die with her. That is suicide, said. No one could survive such a mission. Probably not, Cole agreed, but my ship is small enough to attempt it. The USS Gallant has taken heavy damage, but she can still fly. I have 37 people left who can fight. She paused. I am volunteering for the mission. Stared at her. He had known the humans were brave. He had seen evidence of it throughout the battle. But this was something beyond bravery. This was the calm acceptance of certain death in exchange for the chance to save others. This was sacrifice in its form. Captain Cole said slowly, I cannot order you to do this. You are not ordering me. I am volunteering. There is a difference. Your crew may not share your willingness to die. Cole smiled that tired smile again. I will ask for volunteers only. Anyone who wants to leave will be transferred to another ship before we begin. Knew what would happen. He had spent enough time with the humans now to understand them. Not a single one of them would leave. They would all volunteer to die beside their captain because that was what humans did. They felt fear and faced it anyway. They knew they were going to lose and they fought regardless. The meeting continued. Plans were made, coordinates were calculated, timing was discussed. Listened with only half his attention. The rest of his mind was occupied with a decision he did not fully understand. When the meeting ended, he approached Captain Cole. I request permission to join your mission, he said. Cole looked at him with surprise. You understand what you are asking. This is almost certainly a one-way trip. I understand. Why would you do this? This is not your fight. Your people have their own ships, their own responsibilities. Struggled to find the words. In the language, there were 1,000 terms for different types of combat and warrior philosophy, but there were very few words for the feeling that had grown in his chest over the past 9 hours of battle. I have learned something today, he said finally. I have learned that I do not understand courage as well as I thought I did. Your people have shown me a kind of bravery I have never witnessed before. I want to understand it fully. I want to experience it for myself. He paused. And I want to fight beside warriors I respect. If I am to die today, I cannot imagine better company. Cole studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Welcome aboard, we launch in 1 hour. He returned to his quarters to prepare. He sent a message to Admiral explaining his decision and asking that his personal effects be sent to his family on the. He performed the traditional meditation for warriors facing death, the ritual that was supposed to bring peace and acceptance. It did not bring peace. Instead, he felt fear. Real fear, the kind that humans felt every day. The kind that made your hands shake and your heart race and your mind search desperately for any alternative to the fate you had chosen. He understood now why the humans were so strong. This feeling, this terror, was not a weakness to be suppressed. It was energy. It was motivation. It was the deepest proof possible that life mattered and that giving it up should never be easy. When he boarded the USS Gallant 1 hour later, was afraid. And for the first time in his life, he was grateful for that fear. The USS Gallant launched at full speed into the heart of the swarm, stood on the bridge beside Captain Cole, watching through the forward as bioships filled the space around them. The Allied fleet created a diversion, concentrating fire on the Queen ship's starboard side. The defenses turned to meet the threat, opening a narrow corridor on the port side. Cole flew through that corridor like a woman possessed. The Gallant was a small ship, never designed for this kind of mission. Its hull screamed under the stress of the maneuvers she demanded. Interceptors tried to cut them off, but Cole dodged and weaved between them, using their own allies as shields. A direct hit struck the engine section. The ship shuddered and alarms began to wail. Cole ignored them. Another hit took out the forward weapons array. She did not slow down. The Queen ship filled the now, its surface a twisted landscape of organic matter and ancient scars. "Brace for impact," Cole announced calmly. The Gallant crashed into the Queen ship's hull at an angle that should have killed everyone aboard. Emergency systems kicked in at the last moment, absorbing enough of the impact to keep them alive. Was thrown against his restraints hard enough to crack two of his armored plates. Around him, humans were picking themselves up, bleeding but alive, already reaching for their weapons. They cut their way into the Queen ship's interior. The environment inside was a nightmare. The walls were alive, pulsing with fluids and organic cables. The air was thick and humid, filled with a smell that made eyes water. Bioluminescent growths provided dim, irregular light that cast strange shadows everywhere. Sergeant Price took point, his squad forming a wedge that pushed deeper into the vessel. Private was there, his missing arm replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that had been fitted just hours ago. He moved awkwardly with the new limb, but his aim was still true. Corporal Shaw was there too, her shoulder wrapped in bandages that were already turning red with fresh blood. She had refused to stay behind. They came at them in waves. They poured out of openings in the walls, emerged from pools of organic fluid, dropped from the ceiling like horrible rain. The humans fought them with rifles and blades and bare hands when necessary. Fought beside them, his training merging with their desperate determination. He watched Price take a wound that would have killed most creatures and keep fighting. He watched use his prosthetic arm as a club when his rifle ran empty. He watched Shaw throw herself at enemies again and again, her screams of rage drowning out everything else. They were losing people. Every corridor, every chamber, the team grew smaller. 5 dead, then 8, then 12. The survivors kept pushing forward because stopping meant dying and dying meant failing. Captain Cole led them toward the central chamber where the Queen waited. She moved with quiet certainty, as if she had already accepted her death and was simply fulfilling her final duty. Her gray eyes were calm. Her hands were steady. She carried a plasma charge powerful enough to level a city block. They reached the Queen's chamber after what felt like hours but was probably minutes. The space was vast, a cathedral of flesh and bone that stretched upward into darkness. And at its center, surrounded by 100 guardians, sat the Queen herself. She was ancient. Her body filled most of the chamber, a mass of chitin and organic matter that pulsed with slow, alien life. Sensory tendrils waved in the air, testing the presence of the intruders. She had no eyes but felt her attention focus on them like a physical weight. "Cover me," Cole said simply. The remaining humans in charge the guardians. There was no strategy now, no careful tactics. There was only violence and desperation and the absolute refusal to fail. Lost track of how many enemies he killed. He lost track of his own wounds. He lost track of everything except the need to buy Cole enough time. He saw Price go down, overwhelmed by 3 at once. He saw Fall trying to save him. He saw Shaw make it further than anyone should have been able to, cutting a path toward the Queen with nothing but fury and a broken blade, before she finally fell. Cole reached the Queen. She planted the plasma charge at the base of the massive creature, her movements calm and precise. A guardian caught her from behind, its blade driving through her chest. She did not cry out. She simply looked at one last time and smiled. "Run," she said. Ran. He hated himself for it, but he ran. Behind him, the plasma charge detonated with a sound like the end of the world. The Queen screamed, a psychic shriek that tore through every mind in the swarm. The Queen ship began to die around him, its walls collapsing, its fluids boiling away. He made it back to the Gallant somehow. He was the only one. He sealed the airlock and fired the emergency engines, blasting free of the dying Queen ship just as it began to tear itself apart. The swarm scattered. Without the Queen, they became mindless animals, attacking randomly, fleeing randomly, no longer the coordinated terror they had been. The Allied fleet survived. The medical station completed its evacuation. 12,000 people lived because 38 humans and 1 had been willing to die. Returned to the Oath as a hero. Admiral asked him to submit a tactical report on human combat effectiveness. The document would be studied by military academies for generations. It would shape how his people thought about humans forever. Sat in his quarters for 3 hours trying to find the words. He thought about Captain Cole and her calm gray eyes. He thought about Price and his dark humor. He thought about refusing to give up with 1 arm missing. He thought about Shaw screaming her fury into the face of monsters. He thought about fear. Real fear, the kind that made you want to run and hide and give up. And he thought about facing that fear anyway, because something mattered more than your own survival. Finally, he wrote a single sentence. Do not make enemies of humanity, not because they are powerful, because they are afraid and they fight anyway. He submitted the report and sat alone in the silence of his quarters. For the first time in 200 years, wept. He wept for the humans who had died. He wept for the lesson they had taught him. And he wept because he finally understood something that his people had never grasped. True courage was not the absence of fear. True courage was feeling fear so deeply that it broke your heart and standing firm regardless. The humans had shown him that, and he would carry their memory with him until the day he died.